Imagine a world where women were expected to remain silent in politics, where power was handed down through bloodlines, and where even the idea of a female ruler was dismissed as dangerous, even impossible. Now picture a woman who not only challenged that order, but shattered it completely. She began her life as a concubine, a shadow in the palace, one of many, with little more than her wit, determination, and patience to carry her forward. Yet through cunning, resilience, and a vision that defied her age, she rose step by step until she sat on the dragon throne itself, not as a queen consort, not as a regent, but as the Emperor of China. Her name was Wu Zetian, and her story remains one of the most fascinating tales of ambition and power in all of history. This was a woman who outmaneuvered rivals in a court where betrayal was routine, who used both fear and loyalty to maintain control, and who balanced ruthless decisions with reforms that transformed her empire. She declared herself emperor when tradition insisted such a title was reserved for men alone. She turned Buddhism into a powerful ally, cultivated art and literature, strengthened borders, and restructured government so that talent, not family name, could open the gates of power. But her reign was also marked by secret police, purges, and symbols of authority that provoked outrage and awe alike. To this day, she divides opinion. Was she a tyrant who clawed her way to power through manipulation and fear? Or was she a visionary leader centuries ahead of her time? Perhaps the truth lies in both. What cannot be denied is that Wu Zetian changed the course of Chinese history forever, leaving behind a legacy that continues to spark debate. Welcome to our channel Words of Time. In this video, we are diving deep into the life, reign, and enduring relevance of Wu Zetian, the only woman in Chinese history to rule as emperor. The story of a woman's rise from the low rank of concubine to the highest station of empress is one of the most striking examples of ambition, survival, and the ability to turn disadvantages into strengths. It is not only a tale of personal determination, but also a reflection of the fragile balance of power in the imperial courts of ancient dynasties. Women who entered the palace as concubines were often seen as little more than ornaments. Their value was judged on their beauty, their charm, or their capacity to please an emperor who had countless others at his side. Yet, history has recorded cases where women of humble beginnings managed to climb to the peak of power, not by relying only on physical attraction, but by cultivating intelligence, patience, and political instinct. The transformation from concubine to empress was not only a change of title, it was the culmination of years of observation, struggle, and the ability to adapt to an unforgiving environment where failure could mean banishment or death. The early years of such women often reveal how limited their choices were. Many were born into modest families who saw the palace as both a prison and a chance at advancement. For some, being sent to the court was not an act of free will, but a decision forced by circumstance. A daughter might be given away as part of a tribute to the emperor, or selected during the periodic searches for maidens to fill the inner chambers. Life in the palace was dazzling from the outside, with gold, music, and grand ceremonies, but inside it was a closed world where each woman's survival depended on her ability to secure the emperor's attention or win the protection of influential factions. A young concubine who entered this world with little more than her looks might soon discover that beauty alone faded quickly in a place where dozens of others were equally attractive. To remain noticed, she needed to sharpen her mind, observe patterns of behavior, and learn who could be trusted. More than just a pretty face, the woman who would one day become empress first had to survive as an invisible figure among many, learning from the shadows and waiting for the right moment. Palace life was structured like a miniature society with strict ranks. At the very top stood the empress, followed by imperial consorts and secondary consorts, with concubines and attendants beneath them. Even the lowest-ranked servant had a role in maintaining the hierarchy. A newcomer entered at the bottom and was expected to obey without question. Punishments for disobedience could be severe, ranging from demotion to exile, or in extreme cases, execution. Under these conditions, a concubine who dreamed of more had to be extremely cautious. She could not openly challenge those above her. Instead, she needed to master the subtle art of appearing humble while quietly advancing her position. She had to recognize which senior figures could be approached for support, which rivals to avoid, and when to remain silent. Her early life in the palace, therefore, became a kind of training ground where she developed resilience and patience. Over time, small steps of progress could lead to greater opportunities. A kind word from the emperor, a recommendation from a trusted minister, or even a moment of fortune could lift a woman from obscurity. Yet, these chances were rare and short-lived. The palace was filled with rivals who watched each other constantly. A smile shown at the wrong time, or a rumor spread through the servants' quarters could destroy months of effort. In this sense, survival depended not only on seizing opportunities, but also on protecting oneself from sabotage. Women who succeeded in this environment were those who learned the deeper game of alliances. Strategic alliances became the foundation for advancement. In the imperial court, power did not rest only in the hands of the emperor. Behind the throne stood eunuchs who controlled access, ministers who shaped policies, and families who supplied brides. Each had their own ambitions, and each could help or hinder a concubine's rise. For a woman of humble origins, winning the emperor's heart might not be enough. She also needed to build relationships with those who influenced the emperor's decisions. This required more than flattery. It required understanding people's desires and fears. A eunuch might be loyal if treated with respect. A minister might be supportive if promised future influence, and another concubine might be neutralized through carefully calculated kindness. The woman who would eventually become empress understood that to outmaneuver rivals, she had to think several steps ahead. She observed the jealousies that arose among other consorts, the shifting moods of the emperor, and the constant changes in court politics. Instead of acting impulsively, she waited for moments when others made mistakes. For example, a favored consort might become too proud, openly boasting of her closeness to the emperor. This arrogance could make her vulnerable, as it created resentment among others and suspicion in the emperor's mind. A wise concubine, in contrast, presented herself as modest, loyal, and attentive, avoiding any behavior that might draw unwanted suspicion. By appearing harmless, she disarmed her rivals, while in truth, she was quietly building her network of allies. Court politics was a dangerous battlefield, but unlike armies clashing on open ground, the weapons here were whispers, glances, and carefully chosen words. A rumor planted in the right ear could destroy a rival's reputation. A seemingly innocent remark could change how the emperor viewed someone. The concubine's skill lay in guiding these currents without appearing to be their source. She could praise another woman while subtly pointing out her flaws, or she could comfort a rival while secretly feeding her insecurities. These strategies required immense self-control, as a single slip could expose her intentions. Yet, through years of calculated moves, she positioned herself as indispensable, both to the emperor and to the factions around him. As her influence grew, so did the risks. The closer she came to the emperor's favor, the more dangerous her rivals became. Powerful families who had daughters in the palace would not easily surrender their ambitions. Ministers who wished to control the throne might prefer an empress from a noble background rather than a woman of modest origins. Every step upward meant greater scrutiny. Still, by this time, she had learned how to protect herself. She strengthened her bond with the emperor, not only by offering companionship, but by demonstrating wisdom in state matters. Many rulers were lonely and burdened by responsibility. A woman who could listen, offer thoughtful advice, and ease his doubts often became more valuable than one who was simply beautiful. The emperor might begin to rely on her judgment, asking her opinion on matters of governance, or entrusting her with the upbringing of imperial heirs. Each of these responsibilities increased her standing and made it more difficult for opponents to dislodge her. When the time came for the emperor to choose or confirm an empress consort, the decision was rarely simple. Tradition often favored women from aristocratic families, as their marriage to the emperor strengthened ties with powerful clans. For a concubine of low birth to be raised to this position was unusual and often controversial. Yet, in certain moments, the emperor's personal preference could override custom. If he felt that the woman he favored had proven her loyalty, intelligence, and ability to manage the inner palace, he might risk the opposition of ministers and families to make her empress. For the woman herself, this moment was the reward for years of careful preparation. By the time the title was granted, she was not merely a pretty face who had captured the emperor's eye. She was a seasoned strategist who had outlasted rivals, built alliances, and demonstrated her value beyond appearances. Becoming empress consort was not the end of her struggle, but the beginning of an even greater challenge. The empress was not only the emperor's wife, but also the mother of the nation in the eyes of the people. She had to oversee the vast household of the palace, manage ceremonies, and act as a model of virtue. Any mistake on her part could tarnish the emperor's reputation. But for a woman who had survived as a concubine and climbed to this height, the position also gave her tools she had long sought. She now had formal authority over the inner chambers, the power to reward or punish, and the ability to influence succession by supporting certain princes. These responsibilities laid the groundwork for ultimate power. With the authority of Empress, she could strengthen her alliances further, rewarding those who had aided her rise and securing loyalty from others who once doubted her. She could also act decisively against rivals, stripping them of rank or sending them away from court. At the same time, she had to tread carefully, for open displays of cruelty could turn opinion against her. The most successful empresses knew how to balance firmness with mercy, appearing as guardians of stability rather than as tyrants. They maintained order in the palace, ensured that the emperor's heirs were protected, and reinforced the idea that their authority was rooted in virtue. Yet behind the official duties lay the deeper prize of influence over the throne itself. The empress who had the emperor's trust could guide decisions of state, sometimes shaping the future of the empire. She might advise him on choosing ministers, settling disputes, or planning military campaigns. In times when the emperor was weak, distracted, or ill, she could step in more directly, ensuring continuity of power. If she bore sons, her role became even more significant, for she could advocate for their succession. If her son became crown prince, her influence was nearly guaranteed to extend into the next generation. This ascent, from concubine to empress, illustrates not only personal ambition but also the broader dynamics of power in imperial courts. It shows how the rigid hierarchies of ancient societies could sometimes be bent by intelligence and perseverance. It also highlights the double-edged nature of palace life, where success required constant vigilance, and where the rewards of power always carried new dangers. A woman who reached the throne room of Empress Consort had triumphed over extraordinary odds, but her survival depended on never forgetting the lessons she had learned in the shadows. The story of such a rise continues to fascinate because it combines elements of resilience, strategy, and the human desire for recognition. It shows that even within structures designed to limit them, individuals could find ways to assert agency. For the concubine who became empress, every step of her journey was a testament to the fact that power is not always given to those of noble birth. Sometimes it is seized by those who know how to wait, observe, and act at the right moment. When we speak of a woman rising from concubine to empress, we often think of a remarkable exception, someone who defied all expectations and turned a system designed to limit her into a stage for her greatness. Among all these stories, one stands apart not only for the brilliance of the woman herself, but also for the sheer scale of her achievement. This is the story of Wu Zetian, the only woman in Chinese history to reign in her own name as emperor. Her rise was not only about securing a title or influencing an emperor from behind the screen. She broke through every boundary, assumed the full weight of imperial authority, and reshaped an empire in her image. To understand her, one must go beyond the myths and legends that later generations attached to her name, both to honor and to condemn her. She was a figure who defied easy categorization, combining charm with ruthlessness, intelligence with cunning, and ambition with the ability to translate vision into action. Wu Zetian began her journey like so many others, entering the palace as a concubine. In her youth, she did not come from the great aristocratic families that usually supplied brides to emperors. Her family was respected, but not among the most powerful. This meant that when she entered court, her position was modest. She did not have the backing of a great clan to protect her, nor did she have the guarantee of advancement that came from powerful relatives. Yet, she carried with her a gift that would prove far more enduring: a sharp mind and the determination to use it. Unlike many who were content to play the limited role assigned to them, Wu Zetian studied the dynamics of court life, observed the personalities around her, and began to see possibilities where others saw only barriers. What distinguished Wu Zetian from her peers was her refusal to be defined solely by beauty. She was striking, but she never relied on appearance alone. She cultivated knowledge, sharpened her wit, and learned how to speak in ways that caught attention without appearing to overstep. She understood that emperors and powerful ministers could be flattered, but they could also be guided if one struck the right balance between respect and persuasion. Over time, she gained a reputation not just as a companion, but as someone capable of serious thought. This ability to combine charm with intellect set her apart in a palace where many others were content to rely only on fleeting favor. Her rise was slow, and at times uncertain, but Wu Zetian was never merely reactive. She built alliances, chose her words carefully, and positioned herself so that she could not be easily dismissed. Her strategic mind allowed her to outmaneuver rivals who underestimated her. Many dismissed her early on, thinking of her as just another concubine in a world full of them. But those who did so failed to notice how she used every setback as an opportunity to adapt. She understood that the court was not a place for impulsive ambition. It was a place where patience often won the day. By watching, waiting, and then acting decisively, she turned disadvantages into stepping stones. Wu Zetian's eventual rise to Empress Consort was a triumph in itself, but what followed was even more extraordinary. Most women who reached that point used the title to secure their children's future or to stabilize their family's influence. Wu Zetian saw further. She recognized that real authority lay not only in the household of the palace, but also in the machinery of governance, in the ministers who drafted edicts, in the generals who commanded armies, and in the officials who administered provinces. She refused to limit herself to ceremonial duties. She became an active participant in statecraft, offering advice that was often shrewder than the council of senior ministers. Her ability to understand the needs of the empire, from the stability of the frontier to the fairness of taxation, gave her a credibility that few consorts could ever claim. To understand the magnitude of what she achieved, one must remember the world she inhabited. Tang dynasty China, like most societies of its time, was deeply patriarchal. The Confucian ideals that shaped government and family life placed women firmly in subordinate roles. A woman was expected to obey her father, her husband, and then her son. To imagine a woman ruling the empire was unthinkable to many. The classics spoke of female influence only in cautionary tales, warning of chaos when women gained too much sway. Against this backdrop, Wu Zetian's rise was not just unusual, it was revolutionary. She did not merely bend the rules, she rewrote them. Part of her genius lay in how she managed perception. She did not immediately claim authority outright. Instead, she allowed her influence to grow gradually, so that by the time she assumed full power, it felt less like a shocking usurpation and more like the natural outcome of her role in governance. She framed her authority in terms that echoed the language of virtue and stability, making it harder for opponents to accuse her of undermining tradition. At the same time, she did not hesitate to act ruthlessly when threatened. Rivals who stood in her way often found themselves demoted, exiled, or eliminated. She combined the art of soft persuasion with the hard edge of political necessity. This balance between charm and severity made her both feared and respected. Wu Zetian's story resonates today because it speaks to struggles that remain familiar. She lived in a world that constantly told women what they could not do, and she answered not with complaint, but with action. She did not accept the limits imposed on her, but sought ways around them, using intelligence as her primary weapon. In this sense, she shattered what we now call glass ceilings long before the phrase was coined. She proved that leadership was not tied to gender but to ability, and that the qualities of vision, strategy, and determination were not exclusive to men. For modern readers, her example continues to inspire, not because she was flawless, but because she was undeniably powerful in a world that expected her to remain invisible. Yet, to admire Wu Zetian is not to ignore the darker sides of her rule. She could be ruthless, and her consolidation of power involved harsh measures. Some of her opponents were eliminated through brutal means. She employed a network of secret police to root out dissent. Her reign was not one of gentle persuasion alone. It was also marked by the exercise of fear. This duality makes her a more complex figure. She was neither the demon described by her harshest critics nor the saint celebrated by some admirers. She was above all a ruler, capable of kindness and cruelty, wisdom and suspicion. Her success lay in her ability to use every tool at her disposal, whether soft or hard, to maintain her hold on power. The historical context of her reign shows why her actions were both shocking and in some ways necessary. The Tang dynasty was one of the most dynamic periods in Chinese history, a time of expansion, cultural flourishing, and complex political maneuvering. The empire was vast, stretching across diverse lands, and required strong central leadership to remain stable. Factions within the court were powerful, and rivalries could easily tear the state apart. For Wu Zetian, ruling with caution alone would have invited collapse. She needed both the ability to inspire loyalty and the willingness to strike fear when loyalty wavered. Her reign, though controversial, brought stability at a time when the empire could have fractured. Her story also reveals how narratives about powerful women are shaped by the societies that remember them. After her death, many historians, most of them men writing under later dynasties, condemned her, portraying her as a usurper, a manipulator, and even a monster. They emphasized her ruthlessness and minimized her achievements. Yet, despite these efforts, her legacy endured. The very fact that she ruled as emperor could not be erased. Over time, later generations began to revisit her story, seeing in her not only the harshness of her rule, but also the brilliance of her vision. Today, she is remembered as both a warning and an inspiration, a figure who defied every limitation imposed on her and claimed authority that had long been denied to women. Wu Zetian's journey from concubine to empress, and eventually to emperor, is a reminder that history is shaped not only by systems, but by individuals who refuse to accept their assigned place. She stood at the intersection of personal ambition and political necessity, and she used that position to achieve what no woman before or after her managed in China. Her reign challenges us to reconsider assumptions about gender, power, and leadership. It shows that even in the most rigidly structured societies, there are moments when determination and intelligence can overturn centuries of custom. Her life also invites reflection on how ambition is judged differently for men and women. Male rulers who seized power ruthlessly are often remembered as strong or decisive, while Wu Zetian was criticized for being manipulative or cruel. Yet, if one compares her methods to those of many emperors, they were not unusually harsh. The difference lay in the fact that she was a woman daring to play a game traditionally reserved for men. By stepping into that arena, she exposed the double standards of her age. In this sense, her story remains strikingly relevant, for the question of how women in power are perceived continues to echo in modern politics and society. Wu Zetian's reign did not last forever, and after her death, the dynasty reverted to male rule. Yet, the memory of her time on the throne could never be erased. She had shown what was possible, and though no other woman in China repeated her achievement, her example continued to haunt and inspire. For her critics, she was proof of the dangers of female power. For her admirers, she was a symbol of what women could achieve if given the chance. For history, she was both, a ruler who defied tradition and left behind a legacy that could not be ignored. Her ascent from concubine to empress, and ultimately to emperor, completes the arc begun by so many women whose stories ended before reaching such heights. She represents the fulfillment of the potential glimpsed in others, the rare case where intelligence, patience, and ambition not only secured survival but claimed supremacy. By looking beyond the myths and considering her as a human being, ambitious, flawed, brilliant, we gain not only a clearer view of her time, but also a deeper understanding of the timeless struggle for recognition and authority. Wu Zetian's rise to the throne did not happen in a single dramatic leap, but unfolded through a series of careful, deliberate steps. She had already demonstrated her ability to survive as a concubine, to maneuver her way into becoming empress consort, and to act as the true power behind the curtain when the emperor's health declined. Yet the final stage of her ascent required a leap greater than any other. She would not remain content with being the consort of an emperor or the mother of a successor. She would claim the throne for herself. This decision meant breaking not only palace custom, but the weight of centuries of tradition. For in all of Chinese history until that point, no woman had ever ruled as emperor in her own name. The period leading up to her full assumption of power has often been described as the Great Withdrawal. It was a time when the reigning emperor, weakened both by illness and by dependence, gradually ceded more and more authority to Wu Zetian. What began as an arrangement of convenience soon became a structural shift. Court memorials were addressed to her, decisions were carried out in her name, and ministers who once looked only to the emperor began to measure their loyalty against her influence. For the court, it became increasingly clear that the emperor himself was no longer at the center of governance. Wu Zetian had quietly moved from advisor and consort to de facto ruler. This transfer of authority was not sudden, nor was it clumsy. She managed it with precision, making sure that at each stage there was a justification that could be defended in traditional terms. If the emperor was unwell, it was natural for the empress to act on his behalf. If ministers needed urgent decisions, it was practical that she answer them directly. If state ceremonies required oversight, she was positioned to manage them with grace. In each case, what might have seemed extraordinary was presented as ordinary, until the extraordinary itself became habit. By the time the emperor formally abdicated, the court had already been living under her authority for years. The engineered abdication was one of her boldest moves, for it required not only weakening the emperor's will, but also persuading or coercing key figures in the court to accept the change. This was not achieved by brute force alone, but by a mixture of persuasion, careful placement of loyal officials, and the systematic removal of those who opposed her. Ministers who stood in her way found themselves accused of corruption or disloyalty, often through the work of her secret police. Generals who resisted her influence were reassigned, stripped of command, or neutralized. At the same time, she cultivated a circle of officials who owed their advancement directly to her. These men, many of them from families outside the old aristocratic elite, were deeply loyal. They saw in her not only a patron, but a chance to break free from the domination of ancient clans. By the time the abdication occurred, resistance was fragmented, while support for her leadership was strong enough to prevent collapse. When the emperor withdrew and left the throne vacant, Wu Zetian stepped forward to fill it. The symbolism of this act cannot be overstated. For over 1,000 years of dynastic history, the role of emperor had been defined as the pinnacle of male authority, ordained by heaven itself. Women could be influential consorts, regents, or dowagers, but never the direct embodiment of the mandate of heaven. To declare herself Huangdi, emperor, was an act of unprecedented defiance, one that challenged the deepest assumptions of the political and cultural order. Wu Zetian understood the gravity of this decision, and she prepared the ideological ground to make it possible. She drew upon Buddhist teachings, which offered a more flexible vision of cosmic order than the rigid patriarchal codes of Confucianism. Buddhist texts could be interpreted to suggest that enlightenment and authority were not limited by gender. Wu Zetian sponsored temples, encouraged the spread of scriptures, and presented herself as a chosen protector of the Dharma. By aligning her rule with Buddhist legitimacy, she provided a spiritual foundation that Confucian orthodoxy could not easily counter. At the same time, she did not abandon Confucian rituals altogether. She continued the ceremonies and sacrifices expected of an emperor, ensuring continuity with tradition even as she redefined it. Her declaration as emperor sent shockwaves through the court. For many officials, the idea of kneeling before a female emperor was both bewildering and humiliating. Some protested openly, citing the classics and the examples of antiquity. Yet one by one, these voices were silenced, either through persuasion, dismissal, or harsher measures. Others, more pragmatic, accepted the new reality. They reasoned that loyalty to the throne was loyalty to the state, and if the throne now belonged to a woman, then so be it. For the common people beyond the palace walls, the change was less dramatic. They had long experienced rulers at a distance, and what mattered most was stability, fair taxation, and protection from invasion. Wu Zetian was wise enough to know that legitimacy in the eyes of the people rested on performance, not only on tradition. Outside the capital, reactions varied. Some regional leaders bristled at the idea of a female emperor, and whispers of rebellion circulated. Yet Wu Zetian had anticipated this as well. She kept a close watch on the provinces, rotated officials to prevent local power bases from forming, and dispatched loyal generals to quell unrest before it could spread. Her secret police extended their reach far beyond the palace, reporting any sign of disloyalty. Through this network, she maintained a grip on the empire that was both efficient and feared. At the same time, she sought to win support through reform. She opened examinations to a broader range of candidates, reducing the dominance of the old aristocratic families and allowing men of talent from humbler backgrounds to serve. This not only improved the quality of governance, but also ensured that many in government owed their careers directly to her. The combination of fear and opportunity proved effective. Ministers who might have resisted were too wary of punishment, while ambitious men saw in her reign the chance to rise. Slowly, the shock of her declaration gave way to a new reality. The empire was being ruled by a woman, and yet the sun still rose, the harvests were still gathered, and the armies still marched. What had once seemed impossible became daily fact. In this sense, Wu Zetian not only seized the throne but normalized her reign through competence. She proved that her gender did not weaken her authority, and in doing so, she reshaped the mental boundaries of what was conceivable. Her success did not erase opposition entirely. Throughout her reign, there were critics who never accepted her legitimacy, who waited for her to falter so they could restore the old order. Yet Wu Zetian's resilience lay in her ability to act decisively at moments of crisis. When conspiracies were uncovered, she punished them swiftly. When challenges arose, she met them with both strategy and force. Unlike rulers who wavered, she projected strength, and in the dangerous world of imperial politics, strength was the ultimate currency. The declaration of herself as Huangdi was not only a political act, but also a cultural statement. It said, in effect, that the mandate of heaven was not bound by male gender, that the highest office of the empire was open to whoever proved worthy. Even if later historians tried to obscure or condemn this fact, the reality of her reign could not be denied. She had shattered the precedent of millennia and, for a time, stood as the living embodiment of imperial authority. For the empire, her reign brought both continuity and change. Continuity came in the form of stable governance, expansion of the examination system, and attention to public works. Change came in the elevation of new families, the spread of Buddhist influence, and the unthinkable reality of a woman on the throne. The empire endured, and in some respects even flourished, under her leadership. Whatever critics said, the results spoke for themselves. Looking back, the moment she declared herself emperor stands as the pinnacle of her audacity and vision. It was the culmination of a lifetime spent learning, waiting, maneuvering, and seizing opportunity. From the uncertain beginnings of a concubine, she had advanced step by step until she stood alone at the summit of power. Every stage of her journey had prepared her for this. The patience of her early years, the alliances she built, the rivals she outmaneuvered, the authority she consolidated as empress consort, and the ideological groundwork she laid with Buddhist support. When she finally stepped forward to claim the throne, it was not a reckless gamble, but the natural outcome of decades of preparation. The reactions within the empire remind us that revolutions in perception often come gradually, not suddenly. At first, shock and disbelief dominated. Then came reluctant acceptance and finally habit. By ruling competently, Wu Zetian transformed what was once seen as impossible into something ordinary. The extraordinary became normalized through the steady rhythm of governance, through the daily reality of edicts issued in her name, armies commanded under her seal, and taxes collected under her reign. The story of her seizing the dragon throne is therefore not only about personal ambition, but also about the reshaping of cultural possibility. It illustrates how even the most deeply rooted traditions can be overturned when circumstance, preparation, and will converge. It shows that power, in the end, belongs to those bold enough to claim it and strong enough to hold it. Wu Zetian was both, and for that reason, she remains one of the most remarkable figures in history. Wu Zetian's declaration as emperor was not simply the dramatic climax of her rise. It was also the beginning of a reign that would reshape the Tang dynasty and leave a legacy that later generations, however conflicted, could never erase. Once the dragon throne was firmly in her possession, she did not rule as a figurehead or as a caretaker. She ruled as a sovereign with vision, determination, and an unshakable will. Her time on the throne became remembered not only for the boldness of her claim to power, but also for the way she governed, for the policies she introduced, and for the flourishing of culture and thought that unfolded under her authority. This period is often referred to as her golden age, when the empire witnessed both consolidation and innovation, a time when Wu Zetian proved that she was not merely a woman who seized power, but a ruler who knew how to wield it effectively. One of the most striking aspects of her reign was her redefinition of how authority was distributed within the government. For centuries, the Chinese political system had been dominated by powerful aristocratic families who considered themselves the natural rulers of the empire. They supplied officials, generals, and ministers, often relying on their birthright rather than their ability. Wu Zetian recognized both the dangers and the inefficiencies of this system. Powerful clans could challenge the throne, resist reforms, and use their influence to block rivals. At the same time, relying on birthright over merit meant that talent from outside these circles was often wasted. Wu Zetian saw an opportunity in breaking this pattern, and she pursued it relentlessly. She expanded the civil service examinations, giving a broader segment of society the chance to enter government service based on talent rather than pedigree. For many men of modest background, this was a transformative change. Where once their ambitions might have been limited by their family status, they now had a path to rise if they could prove themselves through study and performance. Wu Zetian understood that by elevating such men, she was creating a class of officials whose loyalty was tied directly to her, not to entrenched aristocratic clans. In this way, her policy of meritocracy was both a practical reform and a political strategy. It made the government more efficient while simultaneously weakening her potential rivals. This policy also had broader cultural effects. Families across the empire began to invest more heavily in education, knowing that the imperial examinations could open doors previously closed to them. Scholars and teachers gained greater influence, and the pursuit of knowledge was elevated as a means of advancement. Wu Zetian's reforms thus encouraged intellectual vigor, for ambition and study now had a more tangible reward. At the same time, she continued to keep the old aristocracy in check. While she did not eliminate them entirely, she ensured that their dominance was diluted and their influence was curbed. This balance of encouraging new talent while restraining old power created a more dynamic political environment and left a legacy that would outlast her reign. Her golden age was also marked by her deep patronage of Buddhism, which she elevated to a position of prominence within the empire. While Confucianism had long shaped the political and ethical structure of society, Buddhism offered her a flexible and powerful tool for legitimizing her rule. Confucian tradition was deeply patriarchal, often used by her critics to argue against the idea of female authority. Buddhism, by contrast, could be interpreted to suggest that enlightenment and virtue were not limited by gender. Wu Zetian saw in this philosophy a means of strengthening her claim to the mandate of heaven. She supported the building of temples, sponsored the copying of sutras, and encouraged the spread of Buddhist teachings. Monks and scholars found in her a generous patron, and in return, many of them crafted interpretations of doctrine that presented her reign as divinely ordained. Great projects of art and architecture were undertaken under her sponsorship, including statues and carvings that celebrated both Buddhist themes and her role as a protector of the Dharma. The result was a cultural flourishing that extended beyond religion into art, literature, and philosophy. Poets composed works that celebrated the harmony of her rule, artists produced new forms of expression inspired by Buddhist imagery, and scholars debated the meaning of governance, morality, and cosmic order. This cultural patronage also served practical ends. By aligning herself with Buddhism, Wu Zetian tapped into a wide base of popular devotion. For the common people, Buddhism was not an abstract philosophy, but a living faith, with temples, rituals, and promises of spiritual protection. By presenting herself as a ruler who safeguarded and promoted this faith, she strengthened her bond with the masses. In this way, her religious patronage was not only a matter of personal belief, but also a shrewd political tool, expanding her legitimacy far beyond the narrow confines of the court. At the same time, Wu Zetian did not completely discard Confucian values or Taoist traditions. She knew that stability required respect for continuity, and she carefully balanced her innovations with gestures of respect toward older traditions. In this sense, she was not a revolutionary who sought to destroy the past, but a reformer who skillfully blended new ideas with old structures. By weaving together meritocracy, Buddhist patronage, and traditional rituals, she created a web of legitimacy strong enough to hold even in the face of deep-rooted opposition. Her golden age was also defined by her attention to military and administrative matters. Wu Zetian understood that the security of the empire depended not only on the brilliance of its culture, but also on the strength of its borders and the efficiency of its governance. She invested in strengthening the military, ensuring that capable generals were appointed based on merit rather than aristocratic lineage. She oversaw campaigns that secured the empire's frontiers, repelling threats from nomadic tribes and consolidating control over contested regions. These actions reinforced the sense that her reign was one of stability and strength. In administration, she continued her push for efficiency and accountability. Officials who were corrupt or incompetent faced removal, while those who demonstrated loyalty and skill were rewarded. She encouraged the use of reports and evaluations to monitor the performance of local administrators, reducing the chances that distant provinces would slip into misrule. The empire under her leadership became more tightly governed, with a stronger sense of central authority. These reforms not only strengthened her rule, but also laid the groundwork for a more resilient state. Wu Zetian's insistence on accountability extended even to those close to her. She did not hesitate to punish officials who failed in their duties, regardless of their status. This strictness created both fear and respect. While some resented her severity, others recognized that her determination to uphold standards improved the functioning of the state. Her approach combined firmness with vision, ensuring that the empire was not only stable but also forward-looking. Her golden age was not without its challenges. Opposition remained, especially among Confucian scholars and members of the old aristocracy who could never fully accept a female emperor. Yet Wu Zetian managed these threats with the same blend of caution and ruthlessness that had brought her to power in the first place. Conspiracies were uncovered and crushed, critics were silenced or marginalized, and loyal supporters were promoted to counterbalance hostility. Over time, her ability to maintain control while continuing to advance reforms earned her a grudging respect even among those who disapproved of her presence on the throne. The image of Wu Zetian during this period is one of both iron and silk, a ruler capable of inspiring loyalty through vision while enforcing obedience through discipline. She created opportunities for men of talent, supported the flourishing of culture and religion, strengthened the military, and governed with a firm hand. The combination of these factors produced a period of stability and prosperity that justified her claim to the throne in the eyes of many contemporaries. Her reign also offers a window into the complexities of leadership. She was not a ruler who relied solely on ideology or solely on force. She combined both, weaving them into a coherent strategy that allowed her to hold power in a society deeply skeptical of her right to do so. Her policies demonstrated that legitimacy could be built not only on tradition, but also on performance. By delivering stability, opportunity, and cultural vitality, she proved that her reign was not a disruption, but a continuation of the empire's greatness. For later historians, it has always been tempting to judge Wu Zetian in extremes, either as a ruthless usurper or as a visionary reformer. The truth, as her golden age shows, lies in the balance. She was ruthless when she needed to be, but she was also visionary. She eliminated rivals, but she also opened doors for new talent. She used religion as a tool, but she also nurtured genuine cultural flourishing. She demanded obedience, but she also provided stability. Her reign was complex, and it was precisely this complexity that made it successful. When we consider her golden age, we see more than just the story of a woman who broke through barriers. We see the story of a ruler who understood that power is not maintained by audacity alone. It must be reinforced by good governance, by policies that strengthen the state, and by the ability to inspire belief. Wu Zetian mastered all of these. She did not simply claim the throne. She justified her claim every day through the way she ruled. As her golden age unfolded, the empire flourished in ways that made it difficult for even her critics to deny her effectiveness. Roads were maintained, the military was secure, culture thrived, and ambitious men saw a path to advancement. By the time her reign reached maturity, what had once seemed unthinkable had become accepted fact. A woman sat on the dragon throne, and the empire prospered under her rule. In this way, Wu Zetian's golden age was not just a chapter in Chinese history, but a broader lesson in leadership, resilience, and the ability to turn barriers into stepping stones. It reminds us that legitimacy is not only inherited but earned, and that power, once seized, must be sustained by vision and action. Her reign stands as a testament to what can be achieved when ambition is matched with competence, and when determination is paired with the wisdom to govern well. The golden age of Wu Zetian's reign dazzled with its reforms, its cultural achievements, and its vision of meritocracy, but behind the brilliance lay an iron hand that never relaxed its grip. She was not only a patron of art and philosophy, nor simply a reformer who expanded opportunity for talented men of humble background. She was also a ruler who understood that power, once seized, could only be retained by vigilance, decisiveness, and the willingness to act with ruthless force when threatened. If her achievements secured prosperity for the empire, her methods of control also left a legacy of fear and controversy. To appreciate the full scope of her rule, one must look not only at her enlightened policies, but also at the darker side of her governance, for it was the combination of both light and shadow that defined her authority. Wu Zetian knew from the beginning that her position was precarious. No woman before her had declared herself emperor, and many at court, from ministers to scholars to aristocratic families, never accepted her claim as legitimate. They whispered that her reign was unnatural, that it violated the principles of heaven, and that the empire would suffer for it. Such opposition, if left unchecked, could destabilize her government and invite rebellion. Wu Zetian did not intend to allow this. She relied on a network of loyal officials and secret police to identify critics, expose conspiracies, and eliminate threats before they could grow. The palace became a place of both awe and dread, for at any moment a whisper of disloyalty could lead to exile, imprisonment, or death. Her methods were harsh. Ministers who spoke too freely against her found themselves charged with treason or corruption. Aristocrats who resisted her reforms were stripped of titles and land. Even members of the imperial family were not safe. Wu Zetian is remembered for having eliminated potential rivals from within her own bloodline, including princes whose claims to succession might challenge her chosen heirs. To some, these acts seemed shocking, but in truth they were not unusual for rulers of the time. Male emperors had also purged rivals, sometimes with equal brutality. What made Wu Zetian's actions stand out was the way they were judged through the lens of her gender. Where male rulers were described as decisive, she was condemned as cruel. Yet, in practice, she did what was necessary to survive in a world where hesitation could mean the end of her reign and her life. Among the symbols of her reign that provoked both admiration and criticism was the so-called heavenly pivot. This was a political and spiritual concept that Wu Zetian promoted to solidify her legitimacy. The idea was that she, as emperor, was the axis between heaven and earth, the pivot around which cosmic order revolved. By presenting herself in this way, she was not only claiming the mandate of heaven, but redefining it to include a woman. It was a bold statement, supported by Buddhist doctrine and reinforced through art, literature, and public rituals. Carvings, inscriptions, and monumental works were commissioned to display this vision of her as the chosen ruler who maintained universal harmony. The heavenly pivot and other such symbols of her reign served as propaganda to convince subjects that her authority was divinely sanctioned. To her supporters, these images offered reassurance that her rule was not a break from tradition, but an evolution of it. To her enemies, they were a provocation, evidence of her audacity in claiming powers that no woman should hold. Yet the persistence of these symbols long after her reign ended shows how effective they were. They planted the idea that legitimacy could be shaped by interpretation and presentation, not only by ancestry or precedent. Wu Zetian also understood the importance of controlling the historical narrative while she was alive. She sponsored scholars who wrote official histories, ensuring that her reign was portrayed in ways that justified her authority. She commissioned poetry and proclamations that celebrated her wisdom and virtue. In this way, she attempted to build a legacy that would withstand criticism. At the same time, she silenced voices that challenged her image. Her court was not a place of open debate, but of careful loyalty, where scholars and ministers learned to align their words with her vision or risk destruction. Despite the fear she inspired, her rule endured for decades, and this endurance itself became part of her legitimacy. Over time, the empire grew accustomed to her presence on the throne. Generations of officials served under her, and the people saw stability maintained year after year. The longer she held power, the harder it became for critics to argue that her reign was a temporary aberration. In this way, her ruthlessness was not merely cruelty, but a strategy for survival, a way to ensure that her unprecedented claim did not collapse under the weight of opposition. Yet her reign also raised questions that would echo long after her death. Was the stability she achieved worth the fear she instilled? Did her purges and surveillance weaken the moral fabric of the court even as they secured her authority? Later historians, writing under dynasties that wished to erase or condemn her, emphasized the brutality of her methods, portraying her as a usurper who poisoned the empire with suspicion. But one must also consider the context. In an age when conspiracies, rebellions, and palace coups were common, any ruler, man or woman, who failed to act ruthlessly risked losing everything. Wu Zetian's iron hand, while harsh, was also effective. It allowed her to survive and to govern, and in the end, survival was the foundation of all her other achievements. The symbols she created, such as the heavenly pivot, left a complicated legacy. On one hand, they affirmed her authority and helped to sustain her reign. On the other hand, they invited later criticism, for they represented a challenge to Confucian orthodoxy that future dynasties sought to restore. Yet even as later rulers tried to erase her influence, they could not fully succeed. The memory of her reign, the monuments she built, and the reforms she introduced continued to shape the empire long after her passing. Her impact on Chinese society was profound. The expansion of the civil service examinations outlasted her, gradually becoming one of the defining features of Chinese governance for centuries to come. By elevating talent over birthright, she weakened the old aristocracy in ways that could not be undone. Future dynasties inherited a system where education and merit provided a path to office, a legacy that reshaped social mobility and government for generations. Even her critics could not roll back this change entirely, for it had proven too effective at strengthening the state. Her patronage of Buddhism also left lasting marks. Temples, statues, and cultural works sponsored during her reign continued to inspire devotion and artistic innovation. The Buddhist presence she nurtured remained strong, even as later dynasties sought to rebalance it with Confucian values. The coexistence of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism in Chinese society owed much to her willingness to elevate Buddhism to a place of central importance. This pluralism, though contested, enriched the cultural fabric of the empire. The image of a woman as emperor also cast a long shadow. No dynasty after her allowed another woman to assume the throne in her own name, and official histories often painted her as a cautionary tale. Yet the very need to condemn her showed how deeply she had unsettled the established order. By proving that a woman could not only seize power, but also govern effectively for decades, she forced future generations to acknowledge possibilities they preferred to deny. Women of later dynasties might not claim the title of emperor, but they exercised influence as empress dowagers, regents, and advisors, their roles legitimized in part by the precedent Wu Zetian had set. Her shadow also loomed in the debates about leadership and morality. Some saw her as proof that ambition unchecked by virtue could lead to tyranny. Others, more quietly, saw her as evidence that ability mattered more than gender, and that women, if given the chance, could rule as effectively as men. The tension between these views endured, shaping not only the memory of Wu Zetian, but also broader discussions of power in Chinese history. As her life drew to its close, Wu Zetian faced the challenge of succession. Having built her authority so firmly around herself, she struggled to ensure that the transition of power would not unravel her achievements. In the end, she was compelled to step aside, and the Tang dynasty was restored under male rulers. Yet even as her enemies reclaimed the throne, they could not erase the decades she had spent as emperor. Her reign remained a fact of history, undeniable and unforgettable. The ruthlessness with which she suppressed dissent, the symbols she used to project divine legitimacy, and the reforms she enacted to strengthen the empire combined to create a legacy that was both contested and enduring. Later dynasties might vilify her, but they also inherited her systems. Scholars might condemn her cruelty, but they also acknowledged her effectiveness. The people might remember her with fear, but also with recognition that under her rule the empire prospered. In this sense, Wu Zetian's legacy is like her reign itself, complex, contradictory, and impossible to reduce to a single judgment. She was both ruthless and visionary, both feared and admired. She embodied the paradox of power, that greatness often requires actions that will be condemned, that survival sometimes demands cruelty, and that lasting impact comes not from purity, but from the ability to shape reality. Her story continues to resonate not only because of what she achieved, but because of what it reveals about power itself. She demonstrated that the structures of tradition, however strong, can be challenged. She showed that legitimacy can be created through performance and persuasion as much as through ancestry. She reminded the world that ambition, when combined with intelligence and determination, can break barriers thought unbreakable. And she left behind a legacy that future generations could neither fully embrace nor entirely escape. The iron hand with which Wu Zetian ruled ensured that her reign endured in a world that was determined to resist her. The golden age she presided over could not have existed without that iron hand. Together, they form the full measure of her reign, a time of brilliance and fear, of opportunity and control, of vision and ruthlessness. Her shadow loomed over Chinese history long after her death, not only as a symbol of female power, but as a reminder of what it takes to seize and hold the dragon throne. The story of Wu Zetian does not end with her death, or with the return of the Tang dynasty to male hands. Her shadow continued to stretch across the centuries, shaping not only Chinese history, but also the broader conversation about gender, leadership, and the nature of power itself. While the official histories compiled under later rulers often condemned her, portraying her as ruthless, manipulative, and unnatural, the endurance of her memory tells a more complicated story. She became a figure who could not be erased, no matter how hard dynasties tried, and in the modern era her life has been reinterpreted as an example of resilience, ambition, and vision. Her enduring relevance lies not only in the details of her reign, but in the questions she forces us to ask. About the place of women in power, about the costs of leadership, and about how history remembers those who break its rules. To understand why Wu Zetian remains compelling today, we must return to the heart of her story. A woman who rose from the status of a concubine in a world that explicitly forbade female sovereignty to become emperor of one of the most powerful empires in the world. That ascent alone is extraordinary. The Tang dynasty was deeply Confucian in its social order, and Confucianism relegated women to subordinate roles, emphasizing obedience, modesty, and domestic virtue. The idea of a woman wielding supreme political authority violated not only custom, but also what many believed to be the natural order of the cosmos. Wu Zetian not only challenged that order, she redefined it. Her declaration of herself as emperor was not simply a political maneuver, but a radical challenge to gender norms that had been entrenched for centuries. Modern readers, especially in an age where conversations about gender equality remain unfinished, see in Wu Zetian a figure ahead of her time. She broke through the barriers of her age with determination and intelligence, refusing to accept the roles that society tried to impose upon her. In doing so, she became a kind of accidental feminist icon, though feminism as we understand it today did not exist in her world. Her life demonstrates that the struggle for equality is not a modern invention, but has deep roots in the past. Women like Wu Zetian, even if they did not set out to inspire later generations, laid down examples of what was possible when courage and ambition refused to yield. Her challenge to gender norms was not limited to her own person. By elevating talented men from outside the aristocracy, she weakened the monopoly of powerful families and broadened the pool of officials. This reform, though aimed primarily at securing her own rule, also had indirect consequences for women. Families of modest means, who now invested in education to prepare sons for examinations, also began to see women's roles differently. While it would take many more centuries before women gained broader recognition, the fact that Wu Zetian had reigned as emperor created a precedent, however contested, that altered the imagination of what was possible. She forced people to ask questions they had never asked before. Could a woman rule? Could she govern effectively? Could she bring prosperity? The answer, demonstrated by her reign, was yes. Her story also resonates today because it illustrates lessons in leadership and resilience that remain timeless. Wu Zetian's rise was not the product of chance alone. She was strategic, calculating, and extraordinarily perceptive. From her earliest days in the palace, she understood that survival depended on more than beauty or charm. She cultivated allies, seized opportunities, and never hesitated to act when the moment demanded it. Her ascent from concubine to empress consort, and ultimately to emperor, was built on a foundation of patience and calculation. She did not rush headlong into danger. She waited, maneuvered, and positioned herself with precision. In this sense, her story teaches the value of strategic thinking, of balancing ambition with timing, and of knowing when to strike and when to hold back. Equally striking was her resilience in the face of opposition. Throughout her reign, she was surrounded by critics who questioned her right to rule. She faced conspiracies, slander, and the constant threat of rebellion. Yet she never wavered. When challenged, she acted decisively, sometimes ruthlessly, but always with a clear purpose: to secure the throne and ensure stability. For modern leaders, her resilience is a reminder that leadership is rarely smooth. Crises will come, enemies will arise, and legitimacy will be questioned. The difference between failure and success often lies in the ability to withstand such storms without faltering. Wu Zetian embodied that strength. Her leadership also demonstrates the importance of adaptability. She did not cling to a single ideology or method of rule. Instead, she borrowed from Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, weaving them together to craft a legitimacy that suited her purposes. She balanced harsh punishments with visionary reforms, fear with opportunity, and propaganda with genuine cultural patronage. This adaptability allowed her to survive in a hostile environment and to govern effectively for decades. Leaders today, facing rapidly changing circumstances, can draw inspiration from her ability to adjust, to reinvent, and to find strength not in rigidity, but in flexibility. Of course, her story also contains warnings. Her reliance on secret police, her use of purges, and her intolerance of dissent reveal the dangers of absolute power. Leadership built on fear can secure stability, but also breeds resentment. Wu Zetian's reign lasted as long as it did in part because of her brilliance, but also because she inspired fear among her enemies. For those who study her, this duality offers a sobering lesson: that power often comes at the cost of trust, and that the line between necessary ruthlessness and destructive cruelty is thin. Her life teaches not only what to admire, but also what to question. Wu Zetian's place in history has long been contested. For centuries, official dynastic histories written under male rulers sought to diminish her achievements. They described her as a usurper, a tyrant, and a corrupter of morality. They emphasized her cruelty while downplaying her reforms. They portrayed her as an anomaly, a warning against female ambition. Yet the very intensity of their condemnation betrays their unease. If she had been insignificant, they could have ignored her. But they could not, for her reign was too impactful, too visible, too successful to erase. The monuments she built, the reforms she introduced, and the prosperity she presided over could not be denied. Modern historians have begun to reevaluate her more fairly, recognizing that the negative portrayals were shaped by patriarchal bias. They note that many male emperors committed similar acts of ruthlessness without being judged as harshly. They point out that her reforms in government examinations, her support of Buddhism, and her strengthening of the state laid foundations that benefited future dynasties. By stripping away the layers of condemnation, a more balanced picture emerges. One of a ruler who was both ruthless and visionary, both feared and effective. This complexity is what makes her captivating. She was not a saint, nor was she a monster. She was a leader navigating the realities of her time, using every tool available to her to secure and sustain her rule. Her relevance today lies not only in what she accomplished, but also in how we interpret her. In a world still grappling with questions of gender equality, Wu Zetian stands as proof that women have always possessed the ability to lead, even when denied the opportunity. In a world still struggling with questions of leadership, she demonstrates that vision, resilience, and adaptability are timeless virtues. In a world still debating the balance between morality and power, her reign challenges us to consider whether greatness can ever be separated from ruthlessness. Beyond China, her story has also become a global one. She appears in literature, film, and scholarship not only as a historical figure, but as a symbol of ambition and determination. Writers imagine her as a heroine, a villain, or a complex blend of both. Artists depict her as regal and commanding, a figure whose very image challenges traditional hierarchies. Scholars debate her policies, her methods, and her legacy, recognizing that her reign cannot be reduced to simple categories. In this sense, Wu Zetian has transcended her own time and place to become a universal figure, a woman whose life speaks across centuries and cultures. Her enduring relevance also lies in the reminder that history is never fixed. The way she is remembered has changed with each generation, shaped by the concerns and values of the time. To Tang officials, she was a threat to Confucian order. To later dynasties, she was a cautionary tale. To modern feminists, she is an icon of empowerment. To political scientists, she is a case study in leadership and statecraft. To artists and storytellers, she is a figure of intrigue and drama. Each reinterpretation tells us as much about ourselves as it does about her. And yet, beneath all the layers of interpretation, the core of her story remains unchanged. A woman who refused to accept the limits imposed upon her, who seized the throne of one of the world's greatest empires, and who ruled it with vision, strength, and an iron hand. That core continues to inspire and provoke, reminding us that history is full of figures who defied expectation, who challenged order, and who reshaped the world in ways that still echo today. The life of Wu Zetian is not simply a chapter in Chinese history. It is a story about human ambition, resilience, and the pursuit of power against overwhelming odds. It is a story about how structures of tradition can be bent, how legitimacy can be constructed, and how leadership can be both inspiring and terrifying. It is a story about gender, about the struggle to define who is allowed to lead, and about how one woman forced an entire civilization to confront that question. Her legacy is both luminous and dark, filled with achievements and marked by fear. But perhaps that is precisely why she remains so relevant. For real power has always been complex, and those who wield it are rarely simple. Wu Zetian's life reminds us that greatness often emerges not in purity but in contradiction, not in perfection but in the ability to endure, adapt, and prevail. She remains captivating because she was human in the fullest sense, ambitious, flawed, determined, and unforgettable.